Okay, we're on Kufya Tes Amid Beis at the Mishnah. Ein maftirin achar hapesach afikoman, which is not a Japanese video game or cartoon character, but it is rather afikomen, which, as we'll see, is some kind of dessert item. But we'll have to see what the direct derivation of this term is. It could be a Greek word. It could also be a contraction of a couple of Aramaic words. The Gemara, so what it basically says is that after the Korban Pesach, there can be no afikomen. Now, my afikoman. So Amar Rav shelo ya'akru mechabru lechabru. So Rav says that the pshat of afikomen means that you're not allowed to switch your location after you finish your Korban Pesach to have dessert somewhere else, and therefore the term afikoman, according to the Rashbam, is a contraction of two Aramaic words, afiku manaichu, which means remove your forks or remove your utensils. And it's no longer, once the Korban Pesach is over, it's no longer time. Basically, remove your utensils and let's go somewhere else. So that you're not allowed to do. Afikoman. Let's go, afiku, let's go take out our utensils and go eat dessert somewhere else. That we don't allow you to do. And the reason why, according to Rav, we don't allow you to do that is we're concerned that if you go to someone else's Pesach Seder, you may partake of their Korban Pesach, and that's Aser. So basically the rule is that once you've had your Korban Pesach, you may be tempted to go to your friend's house to kumzitz or whatever it is. No, that's it. Stay home, and don't go to a friend's house for dessert. But according to Rav, are you allowed to have chocolate pudding after the Korban Pesach?
In your own home.
Absolutely, as long as it's in your own home, right? Okay, and it's got to be parv, right? Okay, so
And Pesach.
and Pesach, right? Okay, probably won't taste very good. Ushmul Omar kegon ardiloi li v'goz laya la'aba. So Shmuel disagrees, and Shmuel says, no, afikoman means, afiku, he says that it means that let's take out dessert items. And like the Rashbam explains, that, Lashon hotziu vehaviu mine mesika, let's produce certain dessert items, certain things that we eat at the end of the meal. And so, or dilai li, that for me, dessert items are like truffles, is what I eat. Not the candy truffles, but like mushrooms and truffles. And gozalaya la'aba, and Rav used to eat small birds at the end of the meal as a dessert item. Not exactly what we would associate as dessert item, but the point is, chicken wings, maybe, yeah. But we don't usually have that as a dessert item. Yeah, sort of like a kumzitz. Like a kumzitz after the main meal. So that he says you should not do. And that's therefore Shmuel is saying not only is it usher to partake of some Korban Pesach, or to go to a friend's house for dessert, but it's even usher to have dessert in your own house. And similarly, V'Rav Chanina bar Shila v'Rab Yochanan Amri kegon tamarim ukloyos ve'egozim. They seem to be saying the same thing. This is the way the Rashbam learns. There may be other Rishonim, but the Rashbam learns that they're really not arguing Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. They're both agreeing that dessert is what the Mishnah is prohibiting. Any eating after the Korban Pesach is prohibited. It's just that Shmuel and Rav's minhag was to have more substantive items, and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan rather would have, dates and parched grain and nuts. Those were the kinds of things he would nibble on. So it could be that he's even being more machmir. In other words, nothing at all. Nothing at all. Tanya kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. The Brisa supports Rabbi Yochanan that ein maftir nachar haPesach kegon tamarim klayos ve'egozim, that you cannot have anything after the Korban Pesach, such as dates, parched grain, and nuts. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel ein maftir nachar matzah afikoma. Now Shmuel tells us an important halacha, which I would not necessarily know from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah just tells me that after the Korban Pesach, I'm not allowed to have dessert. But Shmuel takes it one step further, and he says, Bizman hazeh, that we don't have a Korban Pesach, and so we eat the matzah that we normally would have eaten in tandem with the Korban Pesach. We now have to eat it alone at the end of the meal as a reminder of the Korban Pesach. So that too, we're not allowed to have anything after that as well. So Tanan ein maftirin achar haPesach afikomen achar haPesach udelo aval achar matzah maftirin. The Gemara says our Mishnah doesn't seem to jive with that, because our Mishnah says that the only thing that's prohibited is to eat dessert after the Korban Pesach, because of the importance of the flavor of the Korban Pesach lingering in your mouth. But matzah doesn't seem like we have such an imperative to make sure that that's the last thing that's in your mouth. The Gemara says, Lo mi baya ka'amar. No, you misinterpreted the Mishnah. The Mishnah is telling you a chiddush. Not only may you not have dessert after matzah, but even after the Korban Pesach, you may not have dessert. What does that mean? Lo mi baya achar matzah delo nafish tamayo vel achar Pesach nafish tamayo lo velo matzi avure velo matzi avure, and therefore leslan ba kamash malon. That you might have thought that the only time it's problematic to have dessert after a food item is when the food item is bland, and therefore its taste will not linger if you eat something else that has its own flavor. So therefore matzah is bland, and if I eat chocolate pudding after my matzah, that I won't still be tasting the matzah flavor in my mouth because of the chocolate pudding. So therefore maybe that's the only time it's usher. But Korban Pesach, if you have a steak dinner and you have some sorbet after the steak dinner,
Steak lingers on.
the steak will linger well into the evening, right? Just you may even linger while you're sleeping also, and wake you up in the middle of the night. But the point is that a heavy meat, fatty meat, will linger with you, and therefore you might have thought that it's okay to have chocolate pudding afterwards because that won't drown out the flavor of the Korban Pesach. So therefore, kamash malan. So the Mishnah is not precluding the prohibition of eating after matzah. It's just saying that even Korban Pesach you can't have dessert after. Nema misayele. Let us suggest that the following supports Shmuel, because it says in the Brisa hasufkinin v'hadubshinin v'hiskritin. These are all different kinds of dough products. Sufkinin is like biscuits made from batter, and dubshinin are like sugar or honey donuts, and iskritin are crackers or wafers. These are things that adam imale kreso mehen. You're allowed to fill yourself up with them during the meal at the Seder. Obviously they're not chametz. Provided that you have your kazayas of matzah at the very end of the meal. So ba'achrona in barishona lo. So you see that the last thing you eat has to be the matzah. You see, it's a raya to Shmuel that you can't have anything after the matzah. So the Gemara says lo mi baya kamer. No, this too is a misinterpretation. You could argue that what the Brisa means to tell you is a chiddush. That what? Lo mi baya barishona de ka'achel l'teyavon avol ba'achrona dilma asi l'mechal achila gasa imalo kamash malon. We know that there's a halacha that I have to eat a kazayas of matzah the night of the Seder. That's my mitzvah's aseh to eat matzah. So what the Brisa is telling me is that you might have thought that the only the way that I'm allowed to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah is if I eat that kazayas first, meaning that I have to eat it l'teyavon. I have to eat it with a hearty appetite, and because that's the preferred method of the mitzvah, to eat the matzah with a hearty appetite, and therefore I'm not allowed to defer eating matzah until later on in the meal after I've already had some other stuff to nibble on that is not matzah. So kamash malan, the Brisa says that no, even if you'd like to eat the matzah after either your kazayas matzah, after you've already nibbled on other food items, it is still permitted for you to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, not on an empty stomach. But the Brisa is not really communicating what the halacha is as far as the last food that you're obligated to eat. When it says ba'achrona, it doesn't necessarily mean the very last item. It could mean the second to last item, right? But it's just telling me that I can fulfill my mitzvah of achilas matzah, of that eating that kazayas, even if it's after I've eaten other things. Marzutra Masni Hachi. Marzutra taught the teaching of Shmuel as follows: Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yudah, Amar Shmuel, Maftirin Achar Hamatzah Afikomen. That just the opposite. That according to Shmuel, you are allowed to have dessert after the matzah. Nema Misayele. Let us say that the following supports him: Ein Maftirin Achar Pesach Afikoman Achar Pesach Delo Avola Achar Matzah Maftirin. So it seems like this is just going in reverse. Everything that we've set up until now. Let us now suggest that our Mishnah proves the statement of Shmuel, who says that you are allowed to have dessert after the matzah, after the afikomen matzah. That what? Because it says in the Mishnah that the only thing that you're not allowed to do is to have dessert after the Korban Pesach, implying that dessert after matzah bisman hazeh is okay. So the Gemara says no. Lo mibaya ka'amar. No, it's telling you a chiddush. Lo mibaya achar matzah delo nafish taime. Aval achar pesach emalo kamash malon. That it's telling you not only is it prohibited to have dessert after matzah, which has a bland taste, but it's even usher to have dessert after the korban pesach, which would linger anyway. That's still usher. So meisvei, let's challenge Shmuel's opinion that you're allowed to have dessert after matzah from the following: Hasufkinin v'haduvshinin v'haskritin adam imale kreisum ein v'vad sheyochal kazayas matzah ba'achrona. The Brisa says that you're allowed to have these biscuits and wafers and donuts over the course of the meal, as long as the last thing that you have is the matzah. Ba'achrona in barishon olosa. You see that you have to eat the matzah at the end. You can't have any dessert afterwards. So the Gemara says no. Lo mi baya kamer. No, it's telling you a different chiddush. Lo mi baya barishona de kocha l'teyavon. Aval ba'achrona de asi l'meichla achila gasa emalo kamash malan. Not only can you fulfill the mitzvah of matzah when you eat it as the first item of the meal, but you could even fulfill the mitzvah of achilas matzah even if you eat it in the middle of the meal after you've already filled up on other things, and there's no problem of achila. You don't have to worry that maybe it'll be achila gasa and you won't fulfill the mitzvah. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah, but it's not telling you necessarily that you can't eat anything after matzah. It's just telling you that you're allowed to eat other things before you eat the matzah.
So this is the way we do.
We paskin that you can't eat anything after the afikomen matzah.
Yeah.
That's how we paskin. So we paskin like the first version of Shmuel and not like the second version of Shmuel. Amar Rava, matzah bizman hazeh de'oraisa umara de'rabbanan. The mitzvah of achilas matzah at the Seder today is midioraisa, and morar is midirabanan. Umayshna morar dichsiv al matzah sumorim yochluhu. Why is morar only dirabanan? Because the Torah says you shall eat the morar and the matzah together with the korban pesach. Bisman diika pesach yishmar, bisman deleka pesach leka morar. Only when there's a korban pesach extant am I allowed. Do I have a mitzvah deoraisa of eating morar? Nowadays, there's no temple, there's no korban pesach, so I don't have the mitzvah deoraisa of eating morar. I only have the mitzvah derabbanan.
Why do you take away matzah from that person?
1 second. So the Gemara's question is matzah nami haksiv al matzah smorim yochlu. Very good, Rabbi Black. So then why don't you say the same thing by matzah? That it's also that's written in the pasuk as well. So that also should only be a mitzvah derabbanan. Matzah mihadar hadar beikra ba'erev tochlu matzahs. The answer is because there's a separate pasuk for matzah that lists it independently of anything else, and it says, on that evening you shall eat matzah, independent of anything else. So even though the Torah says eat it together with the korban pesach, but there's another pasuk that says eat it independently, and so that's how I know that even when I don't have a korban pesach, there's a mitzvah deoraisa. The Ravacha bar Yaakov Amar echad zeh ve'echad zeh derabbanan. Ravacha disagrees, and he says that both matzah and morar bisman hazeh are de'rabanan. There is no de'oraisa anymore. So ela haksiv ba'erev tochlu matzah. So what is he going to do with that pasuk that says in the evening just eat matzah? So hahimi boile l'tamei v'shoy b'derech rechoka. That's coming to tell me no. In temple times, when you're unable to eat the korban pesach because you're far away or you're tamei, you still have a mitzvah deoraisa of eating matzah. That's what the pasuk of Be'erev Tochlu Matzahs is coming to teach. Not in a post-Churban era. It's talking about during temple times, you have a mitzvah deoraisa of eating matzah even when you can't eat the korban pesach. But when there's no korban pesach available to bring, then, says Ravacha, the Torah would hold that you're pater midioraisa. The salkadaita chamina kevin to pesach lo achli matzah or namin lo nechol kamash malan. I would have thought that in temple times, if I can't eat the korban pesach, I should also be exempt from eating the matzah as well. So, and the morar kamash malan, then I still have an obligation to eat the matzah. The Rava Amar Lacha Tamei v'Yoshev b'derech rechoka lo tzarich kra. Rava's response to that is that's not the correct way to read the pasuk. How do I know? You don't need a pasuk to tell me that during temple times, if you're tamei or far away, you still have an obligation to eat matzah. Because why should they be any worse off than an uncircumcised person or a person who is a mumar, a person who's not part of the faith but is still Jewish? Because after all, we learned in a brisa, the Tanya, kol arel lo yochal bo eno ochel avol ochel b'matzah umarar, that the Torah says that any uncircumcised person may not partake of the korban pesach. So what we learn from there is it says only the korban pesach is he precluded from eating. But other mitzvahs of achila the night of the Seder, he's still obligated to. So once I have a pasuk telling me that an Oriel has a mitzvah of matzah, then that also teaches me that a person who's tamei and b'derech rechoka also has a mitzvah of eating matzah. So I don't need the pasuk of be'erev tochlu matzos to teach me that. It must be coming to tell me in a post-Churban era, post-temple era, I still have a mitzvah of eating matzah. So the idach.
Why not more?
One second. Rav Acha's response to that is the idach ksiv bahai uchsiv bahai utzrichi. Rav Acha's response is that you need both psukim. You need a pasuk to tell me that an orel eats matzah when he can't eat the korban pesach, and you need a separate pasuk to tell me that a tamei in a derech rechoka eats matzah when he can't eat the korban pesach. You need both. Now the Gemara doesn't tell me why, which is very bizarre. It's very strange why the Gemara doesn't speak it out. And we won't answer that question. It's why the Gemara doesn't speak it out. I have no idea. But the Rashbam speaks it out. The Rashbam says the reason you need both is because if I only had one pasuk, I would have thought that it's only addressing an Orel and a Ben Nechar. These are people who are permanently precluded from eating the korban pesach. They will never be able to eat the korban pesach, and therefore, for them, they still have a mitzvah of eating matzah the night of the Seder. But a person who's tamei and b'derech rechoka, he has a make-up opportunity to bring the korban pesach the following month in Pesach Sheni. And therefore, I might have thought, without a second pasuk, I might have thought that just like he has a make-up for the korban pesach, he'll make up the eating of the matzah then also, and he doesn't have to eat matzah the night of the Seder. And that's why I need, says Rav Acha, I need a second pasuk of Be'erev Tochlu Matzahs. But even though Rav Acha states that there's no mitzvah of matzah deoraisa bisman hazeh, Rava, as we said, holds there is, and the Gemara concludes with Tanya Kava Seder Rava. We have a brisa that supports Rava. Sheishes yamim tochal matzos uvayom hashvi atzeres l'Hashem Elokecha. That for 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the 7th day it shall be a day of holiness for the Lord your God. And you notice that here the Torah, even though there's another pasuk elsewhere that says Shivas yamim matzos tochelu, 7 days eat matzah. Here this pasuk only says for the first 6 days out of Pesach you shall eat matzah. So what is that supposed to be communicating? Ma shavi rishus av sheishes yamim rishus. That this pasuk teaches me that just like on the 7th day there's not an absolute obligation to eat matzah, but you can if you want to, so too the other 6 days of Pesach there's no obligation, even though the Torah says eat matzah for 7 days. It's not a mitzvah chiyuvit. It's not an obligatory mitzvah. It's just telling you that when you do eat matzah, every bite that you take is a mitzvah. My time. How do I see that from this pasuk? Havidavar she haya bichlal v'yatsa min laklal olamed lo lamed alatzma yatsa el lamed al klal kulo yatsa. It's one of the 13 hermeneutic principles of Rabbi Yishmael that we recite every morning in the Karbanos section. That let's say I have a general rule, which is to eat matzah. And then I have one day out of those days that is explicated with telling me that it doesn't apply on this particular instance, or there's something unique about this particular day out of all of the other days. So the principle is that it's not coming to just reflect upon that day, it's coming to reflect upon all of the days of Pesach. That's one of the ways that we...
In the same way that it reflects on that specified
Yeah, so just like on the 7th day, there's a mitzvah, but it's not an obligatory mitzvah, it's just a mitzvah that if you do it, you get schar for it. So too on all of the other 6 days, if you eat matzah, you get schar, but it's not that it's an obligatory mitzvah.
Why is there a chiyuv the first night?
1 second. We're in the middle of the brisa. So yachal af laila harishon rishus. So you might think that that's true also for the first night, that it's not a mandatory mitzvah. Tamul omar al matzos umrom yuchluhu. So that's why the pasuk says that you're obligated to eat matzah together with the korban pesach. So ainli ela bisman shebeis hamikdash kaim. So that only tells me when the temple is standing that there's an obligation the first night. Bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kaim inai. And how do you know that even when the temple is not standing, there's an obligation the first night of Pesach? Tamul omer be'erev tochlu matzos hakosuf kevochova. Therefore, you have the pasuk of eat matzah in the evening. So it turns out that there's a mitzvah deoraisa, and that's how we paskin, that there's a mitzvah deoraisa of matzah bisman hazeh deoraisa, and there's only a mitzvah of maror bisman hazeh, which is derabanan. So and it only applies, the mitzvah of achilas matzah only applies the first night. So theoretically, if a person wanted to be yotzei, just to eat other foods without eating matzah for the rest of Pesach, he could. The only problem would be he would need lechem mishnah for Shabbos and Yantiv Sudas. But during Chol HaMoed, technically, he could get by without eating matzah. Although there still is there are other imperatives midrabanan that a person should try to have 14 meals with matzah or 15 meals with matzah, depending upon how you learn, over the course of Pesach.
You still not be getting the mitzvah of eating the matzah.
What?
You still would not be getting the mitzvah of eating the matzahs.
You get.
If you didn't.
If you don't fulfill that mitzvah, but you're not doing an aveira by not eating matzah.
You don't gain from the benefit of eating matzah. We said that you still would get
As I said, listen carefully. As I said, you don't get punished if you don't eat it,
right.
But if you do eat it, you get rewarded.
It's like wearing tzitzit.
That's right.
It's like wearing tzitzit.
That's right.
You get
But we don't see a bracha al chiyus matzah the whole.
Correct. That's true. We don't.
So it's only if the person missed it the first night,
Why
they
not?
don't get the mitzvah the next day, or is that still part of it?
What's that?
The person didn't eat the matzah for some reason the first night, and he ate it the next day. Is that still a mitzvah?
No, not at all.
So those people who went traveling, we just finished saying, they on the road, they still have to stop on the road.
Okay.
Why is it not like sukkah? Like you're not machir to eat in the sukkah, but if you do, you say bracha.
Yeah, it's a good question why we don't make a bracha of al achilas matzah for all 7 days. Excellent question. I don't have an answer for you.
Unless the one bracha covers the whole year.
Pesach.
You can say that for sukkah too.
Yeah, I don't have an answer.
Oh, the hamotzi somehow covers it?
What?
The hamotzi that you make covers it?
I don't know. No, we don't. But why?
It's not very mitzvah.
There's no mitzvah to sit in the sukkah the other days? Only the first day it's a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah? Is that what you're saying?
It says basukos teishvu, right? It's that only when there's no obligation to, if you're not eating, you don't have to, you don't make a bracha.
But you're supposed to move into the sukkah.
Yeah, but you don't make a bracha on sleeping in the sukkah. You only make a bracha on eating. So if, let's say, a person didn't want to eat, just wanted to nibble on,
fruits and vegetables,
didn't want to have meals, so he wouldn't make a bracha. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why. It's a very good question. Tzarachia. Okay, Mishnah. Yashnu miktsasan yochlu, kulan lo yochlu. Next Mishnah tells me that if people fall asleep at the Seder before they've had a chance to finish eating the Korban Pesach, so if only a portion of the people fell asleep, then when they wake up, yochlu, they're still allowed to continue eating. But if everybody fell asleep, like during those long Seders where Uncle Joe regales us with his stories about the war, and then the rest of everyone's sitting on the couch and everyone falls asleep.
picture on the cover of one of those.
It's like Saturday Evening Post or whatever. Right? Right?
Everyone has
So in that case, then if everyone falls asleep, then you're not allowed to commence with the eating of the Korban Pesach. Now this is a Takanas Chachamim according to the Rashbam, and it's a Gezerah that because it has the appearance of changing my place, since I had a Hesach Hadas from the beginning of my eating until the end of my eating, it almost as if I'm changing places. And we learned before that you're not allowed to change. Once you set up your place of eating the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to move. So therefore, by falling asleep in the middle, it's tantamount to a form of moving, at least mentally moved. And therefore, but the Rashbam says this is purely a chumrah derabanan. It's not a deoraisa halacha.
So the people who remain awake maintain the place for the Korban Pesach?
Apparently so. Yeah, they sort of maintain the continuity, right? So Rabbi Yossi Omer nisnamnu yochlu nirdamu lo yochlu. Rabbi Yossi is further machmir, and he says even if only a portion of the group fell asleep, when they wake up, if they were in a deep slumber, then they can't eat. It's only if they were in a quasi sleep state called nimnum, which is dozing, a drimmel, right? A drimmel, right? That's when we say that when they recover from that drimmel, that they're allowed to commence eating. But but apparently it seems like from Rabbi Yossi that everyone agrees that if they all fall asleep, it's a
So
problem.
because the group was enjoined without Korban Pesach, is that why if one of them stays awake, somehow that makes
That creates a cohesiveness to the chabura.
because they were joined
Yeah,
to eat it.
yeah, I think so. So anyway, next halacha is lo yochlu pesach acher lo yochlu. Period. Ha-pesach acher chatzos metameis hayadayim, ha-bigul v'anoser metameis hayadayim. Last thing is that the korban pesach after chatzos, when you're no longer allowed to eat the korban pesach, if you touch it, it renders your hands tamei. That too is midrabanan, as a way of preventing you from partaking of it after chatzos. Just like pigul and nosar midrabanan make your hands tamei if you touch them. Again, as a preventative measure from having you partake of them. The Gemara now says, Rabbi Yossi Omer nisnamnu yochlu nirdamu lo yochlu. So we quote Rabbi Yossi, he says, if you're taking a slight doze, so then when you wake up, you're allowed to eat as long as the rest of the group is awake. But if a small part of the group goes into a deep slumber, so then when they wake up, they cannot eat anymore. So the Gemara's question is, what is the definition of a dremel? Right? What is that? So Amar Ravashi, nim velo nim, tir velo tir. It's awake and not awake. It's slumbering and not slumbering. You're in a twilight zone of between sleep and awakeness. Kegon de karile va'ani velo yada la'adure svara. So, for example, we call out your name, Alan. Right?
Spaced out.
Yeah. Right.
Spaced out.
Right. Yeah. It's like your eyes are closed. You're sitting in your chair. Alan.
Yeah.
Do you know what time it is? So you don't have the ability to respond intelligently, but at least you acknowledge when you hear you are aware of external sensory stimuli, but you're not able to respond intelligently. I'm sure there's a scientific term for this. I don't know what it is, but
in English,
I live
we
in
have
that
a word for dream.
What's that?
We have a word for dream
What's the word?
in English.
Yeah.
No, dream is Yiddish.
I know Dremel is Yiddish.
So I'm asking you if you.
Oh, so
Dozing, I guess.
dozing.
Dozing.
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Dremel sounds better.
The chimad karule mitkar, and also when you wake up, they say, Alan, do you remember that we were trying to get you up? Yeah, I remember. I wanted to sleep. Okay, so Abaya haba Yosef kamei de Rabba chaz de kanimne. Abaya is sitting in front of his Rebbe Rabba, and he notices that Rabba is starting to doze off. So Amrlei, meinim kanai mar. Rebbe, you're falling asleep. You won't be able to partake of the matzah afterwards. So Amrlei, minu me kaminam name. Utna nisnamnu yochlu nirdamu lo yochlu. Rabba says, don't worry, I'm only taking a dremel. And basically, even though normally we said you can't answer intelligently, Rabba was so engaged that he was able to answer even intelligently. He says, don't worry. He says, it says in the Mishnah, as long as you're not totally out of it, you can commence eating afterwards. So we're going to hold it here for today.